I always talk about purpose being a verb and not a noun.
Right.
So it's not something that you go looking for, but it's something that you create and you bring.
I feel like one of the big shifts with personal branding, certainly in the time that we've been doing this, is that there is a process and a strategy to it. I mean, we are strategists when we finish that program, but I have gotten more and more focused on all the pieces that it makes up who a person is, and those pieces become your personal brand. And if you really understand those, you can be adaptable. You can say, which pieces of myself do I want to have show up a little bit more, all while being consistent with your personal brand. And so with the idea of purpose, to me, purpose is one of those pieces that we look at in a personal brand. And here's another piece I've been playing more and more with too, is that what does it look like in present time? Because so many of us, I think, in the career field look at what's your experience, where have you come from, and yes, of course, where are you going? But often people don't stop in I mean, it's what mindfulness is all about, right? It said, how do you stay in the present moment? And in this present moment of who you are, what does that look like in the world of work? And then how do you put the strategy together to do that? And it's very much the emotional piece. It's very much the core of the our humanness.
Yeah, and I think that's with adaptability, you are more adaptable when you're really rooted in who you are.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes people say, well, if I'm adaptable, then I'm kind of that chameleon. And it's like, well, maybe, but you're really able to adapt because, as you said, you're so confident in who you are that you
Mhm.
can say, okay, here are the pieces that I can pull and put together and still be confident,
Mhm.
even though I'm making this change versus someone who's maybe not that confident in who they are overall. Then when they have to change, they change too much, right? They almost
Right.
like throw out everything and try to start over, which doesn't work.
So I actually have a great quote for that. There's a theologian named Richard Rohr, and he's written 30 books or something. He's an old man now. And he says, when you don't have your true self, you take on everybody else's false self. And that
Mm,
so is in alignment with what you just said, because and the idea of personal branding really, right, is that if you know yourself well, you can say, I'm really good at these pieces. I don't really know much about this, but I'll either figure it out or I'll find somebody who can do it instead of pretending all the time. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
just feeling overwhelmed or feeling like yeah, I got to start over and being frustrated, which is
Mhm.
what I see a lot of people in career change. They kind of want to throw everything out and start over,
Mhm.
but then they're frustrated that they have to start over.
Right. Or that no one's responding to them. And I think
Right.
that it's, when no one's really responding to them, it's because they really are sending out such a mixed message because they aren't very clear about who they are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We just had a person yesterday on our clubhouse room that was talking about he'd been out of IT for 5 years and wanted to go back into
Mhm.
it. And it's kind of that same piece of you've got to really own that identity and be able to fit in what have you been doing for the last 5 years
Mhm.
into that identity without confusing people
Right.
and finding that grounding.
And I think the adaptability there is that, that they need to catch up, right? So they still have the skill set, or they wouldn't have probably been in that kind of work anyway, but they might be behind. And so they have to be willing to maybe take a lesser position than they would have, or something where it's a little bit more instructive. Yeah.
Well, and to your point earlier, to have confidence in telling that story, but also to be able to put the story together in a way that makes sense to the audience and doesn't leave them feeling like you're unfocused or don't know where you're going or where you've been.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, one of the pieces too, and this I think ties into confidence and knowing who you are, is this idea, and this was kind of what came up in some of the studies I've been doing, is this idea of what's called purpose anxiety. And I think this could actually go into all the things we're talking about, which is that place about, is there something wrong with me because I don't have like some big major purpose? Or
Right.
but I think some of that is in doing your own work, you start to look at purpose with a small p, like the day-to-day purpose things. And pretty soon you're asking bigger questions, you're following that thread, and it becomes more obvious in that. I know that, sorry, that was a little departure from what you were talking about, but
No, it's perfect. And then, I always talk about purpose being a verb and not a noun.
right.
So it's not something that you go looking for, but it's something that you create and you bring because you
Mhm,
find how is what I'm doing today adding purpose to what I want to do long term or whatever it might be. And so it's so funny. This fits perfectly with what you were just saying. So this
mhm,
is also
mhm,
from the McKinsey
mhm,
that we have multiple layers of purpose,
mhm.
right?
And there was,
It isn't
the
work.
piece too is that, our purpose is always being suggested by life, right? So if you look at
Mhm.
these three different circles, there may be times where the purpose of the organization really takes on a stronghold for you, or the actual work you're doing, or maybe it's the volunteer things you do on the outside, or the causes that you care about there. And, and it's so much of it too is just actually purpose is a constant question of how am I
Mhm.
engaged with life? How am I part of that? And I think a lot of times, again, I see people looking for something to have this concrete purpose from the outside, that they are looking for the noun version of it, speaking, of your verb version of it. And it's really your own curiosity, it's your own questions that you're asking, and how do you follow that thread in your life to find purpose in those things that you're doing.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And it comes kind of back to that agency, right? That you have agency over purpose. It's not
Mhm.
something that you wait for someone else to give to you, and that it changes
Right, it's
is
not a
kind of what
static,
you said.
to your
Yeah.
adaptability piece. It should always be evolving, much like your personal brand. There is the core of who you are, but it needs to constantly be updated, right? Rebooted, get a new program update or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that helps people feel like we always wanna be evolving in some way, that,
Mhm.
nobody really wants to stay in the same place, do the same thing, be the same person. I don't know, learning and growing, obviously, those 2 things go together because you are the same person, but you're evolving at the same time.
Right. And there may be pieces that, it was interesting too. Dan Pink, you know who he is, of course.
Yeah.
And he's come out with a new book. I'm not even sure if it's quite out yet, but it's coming out. It's called Regrets. And
Mm,
this is it. He kind of comes at it from another angle, which is that when you think about regrets, they're often things you cared about that you didn't do, that you didn't follow through with. And so, even as we talk about personal branding and passions and purpose and these different things, it's that if you are being adaptable and following purposes as they're suggested in life, the idea is that in 10 years, if you were to look back, like if you were to add 10 years to your where you are now, look back and say, what would I have regretted that I didn't do 10 years ago? I mean, because certainly we have all things that, hopefully we don't have a lot of regrets. But he was talking about, if you think about your regret things from the idea of an angle of regret, you'll live your life more fully.
yeah, well, and I'm a big fan of, The Positive Intelligence by Shirzad
Yeah.
Suramin, and he talks about that as being one of the sage powers
Hmm.
of doing that future. I don't remember what he calls it exactly, but putting yourself in the future,
Hmm.
what would I want to have done in this situation when I look back on my life?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, right, and that question, of purpose is like the ultimate question is, if I didn't exist, how would the world be different? Now that starts to get purpose with a big P.
Right. Yeah, and I love your purpose anxiety, and I think people get passion anxiety, right? I don't know what my
Mhm,
passion is. It's like, well, that evolves, and a lot of times we become passionate about
mhm,
something we don't necessarily know
mhm,
we're passionate about. I mean, I had no idea that I was passionate about career work until I
mhm,
started doing it, right?
mhm, mhm.
And probably many of us would say that because it's not something you grow up thinking you're going to do for a job. So someone, I don't know, unfortunately, who this is, but
Uh-huh.
remind job seekers that we've all been designed with inherent gifts and talents. Purpose is found between the things we care about most and the things we dislike or can't stand.
Mhm,
Interesting.
mhm.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, usually when you're upset about something, it's a huge value has been crossed, right?
Mm, right.
That's one of the ways I always look at as a marker when I get mad about something. I go, okay, well, what value of mine was just crossed? I am laughing. I have a quick story. So my husband recently retired, and and that's always a really interesting time. He's been a corporate lawyer. He's had, ran a law firm, like big jobs, and he's now home. But I knew he wouldn't sit still for long. So one day he says, I always love working at the pool. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, and then he says, they have a shortage of lifeguards. And I'm like, okay. Next thing I know, he's gone online. He's gotten his lifeguard recertification and he's working at the pool as a lifeguard with all the, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And, but my point on that is that he found that purpose and he's still who he is. He's actually doing the job in much the same way he did as a lawyer, but with obviously a whole different skill set.
Yeah, that's so fun.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
the
you're right.
idea of your brand is that he's still committed to the people he serves. He does it in a way that's really ethical and shows up on time, and all those pieces are his brand. He just not doing it as a lawyer. He's doing it as a local lifeguard.
Yeah, and they're so lucky to have him.
They
That's
are.
so yeah. Oh my goodness. I can see if I was a lifeguard that he would be just a joy to have around,
He's
just bring that different perspective.
yeah.
But you're so right that we still show up as who we are and that a different definition of purpose, that he's found a new way to enact that.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you saw there's some big I have been a little bit distracted with our move, but I did see that there's a big poof online about Malcolm Gladwell's recent comments about that everybody should go back to the office, because you can't find purpose or community if you aren't in an office. And what we're talking about here just talks to how everybody's going to do that differently,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Some people need that
Right.
office.
Right. So some people really need that to feel connected and other people don't. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, just from a community standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I do believe is that we all need community.
Mhm.
Now, how you define that and how you
Mhm.
create it, it is very individual to
Mhm.
and to everybody. I think part of what our clients are looking for right now is that community. What is that going to
Mhm.
look like for me? And getting a new job, will that help me build better community? Maybe I don't feel like I've had a good community where I'm at right now, virtual or in person. I don't
Mhm.
think I don't think you automatically have community because you're in person, right?
Well, and okay, I'm going to give you an example of just being creative and doing something like that. So we live on the corner, and so people walk by our house to get to the local trail. So we put aside, and I said, we all say hello, but nobody really knows each other. So we put a sign out front on a whiteboard that we had that said, "We love that you walk by, but come by on Friday night at 5 o'clock for a glass of wine." And we thought, we'll see if anyone shows up. We had 14 people that we didn't know that kind of came in and out, like they came for an hour, left for an hour, after an hour. And um, it was really interesting. Two people were great business contacts, like randomly, just people wandering up. And, so I think part of that idea of purpose is I'm a connector, that's a core of who I am. So that was just a nice way. I had no intention of anything. Turned out one of them is an employment lawyer, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I could really use somebody like you. I don't know what to do with some of these people." And he's like, "Can we be in touch?" And it was really interesting. But back to the idea of community, is like we're trying to even create that in our neighborhood, and it could turn into to a stream of business, which was not intended at all.
Yeah, you're such a good connector, Susan. I love that
And we
about you.
really had fun, and we had our little granddaughter there, and she was the life of the party, and so it was very fun.
Well, I just want to give a little sneak peek of the workbook here that we have created for our personal branding strategist, because a personal branding strategist is an opportunity to learn about how you can help your clients. while you're also learning about yourself. This is just one of the many worksheets here that we have. Let me see if I can get back to it.
And you have done
Thank you.
really a beautiful job of putting this together because it was in very much in need of an upgrade. And I love the way you've colorized it. I love, you've taken the core material, but you've just modernized it and done a really nice job.
Yay, we've been having so much fun. So we talk about the 5 different types of values, and we've got little values checklists for people in those.
Mm-hmm.
And then Susan, we always start with what's your one word,
Mm-hmm.
so that people can really distill down how they would define themselves. And then if I don't have this live right here, but you can click through the different tabs on the right. And one of the other areas we were talking about was knowing one's strengths. That was high up in the McKinsey skills. So we've got a whole section on strengths and ways that you can help your clients identify their strengths, obviously, with coaching questions, unearthing their fascinations. So if you are a strategist and you haven't seen this yet, pay attention to your email, because we're going to be sending you the place where you can go in and download it. And if you haven't joined us for the strategist program and you're curious, let me know, and we'd be happy to set up a time to chat further with you about the program. So it's really an opportunity to clarify your brand. People always get so much out of it for themselves, but then to walk away with these tools that help your clients really get the foundation in these areas of who they are, so that they can build that foundation.
And I again, I've been pretty busy lately, surprisingly busy I thought, really for summer. And I really use this process as my baseline process that I use on everyone. And then, of course, it's very individualized for the person within what we use, which pieces. But it is such a great foundation, and I really love it. Like, over and over, I'm really grateful to have this process as a foundation for the coaching I do.
Right, because then they can go through and do some of that work, and then you can take it deeper in your sessions. And I know you work with a lot of kind of mid-level and executive clients
Mhm.
who are making moves that feel so big, right? Because they're usually giving up a big job. Yeah.
Right. And so they really need to be able to have the conversation, especially to everybody. But say somebody who's doing even a big career change where they're going into a different industry, I would say, really people just stumble so much on what are they going to say about who they are and what they have to offer. And yeah, and so that's a big piece. And I was saying to somebody today as an information call, and I said, people often want to skip right to the place about how do I message who I am.
Mm.
And I said, it never works. You can't skip that part about who you are, because you can never message in an honest way.
Yay.
Right.
All right. Yay. Well, so we start the personal branding class 2 weeks. If you're interested, you have plenty of time to reach out, and Susan and I would be happy to share with you about the program. We've already got a fun group from Canada, the US, and Brazil that is forming. So we're going to have a great class. Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your thoughts on
My
purpose.
pleasure.
This has
Yeah.
been fun.
Very good.
Thank you,
Thanks, Maria.
everyone.